If you think war began with armies and kings, you've been lied to. The first wars of humanity were not fought by nations, but by small bands of hunters and gatherers. Long before swords and shields, men raised sharpened stone. Long before battlefields, they turned riverbanks, caves, and villages into killing grounds. Archaeologists have found the proof: skeletons with flint blades lodged in their ribs, skulls crushed by clubs, children buried with bound hands. These are not accidents. These are massacres. From the banks of the Nile at Jebel Sahaba to the lagoon of Nataruk, where women and unborn children were slaughtered, to the skull pits of Ofnet, the death pit of Talheim, and the fortified village of Schletz, until finally, the battlefield of Tollense, where thousands clashed in Europe's first Great War. This is not myth. This is not legend. This is evidence. And it tells us one thing: humanity has always known war. This is the first wars of humanity. The mist clings low to the earth. It is dawn, and the sky is heavy with silence. The river bends through reeds and black earth, its surface unbroken, until the first arrow cuts the air. The sound is sharp, cruel, unmistakable. The flint tip finds flesh. A man staggers, clutching at his chest, eyes wide with shock. His cry dies in his throat as blood spills into the water. Chaos erupts. Figures break from the haze, shadows rushing forward. Clubs crash against bone with a hollow crack. Spears plunge, twisting, tearing. The air fills with screams. Some cut short, others long. Wailing, desperate. A woman falls, face first into the mud, her arms bound. Beside her, a child scrambles, only to be struck down. The earth drinks deeply, swallowing the lifeblood of the fallen. It is not battle, it is slaughter. The attackers leave no mercy. A blow to the skull here, an arrow to the spine there. Survivors flee, but few escape. When the screams finally fade, only the river speaks, carrying away the red of the dead. The mist lifts. The ground is littered with bodies, twisted, broken, left to rot. Thousands of years pass. The earth buries what remains. Grass grows over bones. The river shifts its course. The screams are forgotten, until the earth is disturbed again. Archaeologists kneel where the blood once flowed. They brush away the soil. Bone emerges, a rib pierced by stone, a skull split wide by a crushing blow. The past speaks, and it tells us what we did to each other long before kings, long before nations, long before history had a name. These are the first wars of humanity, evidence written not in words, but in wounds. The graves do not lie.
Along the Nile in ancient Sudan, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary. 61 skeletons, buried in shallow graves. More than half carried the marks of violence. Arrowheads still lodged in ribs and spines. Skulls crushed by clubs. A woman pierced by more than a dozen stone blades, some wounds healed from earlier attacks, others fatal. A child with a sharp fracture across the skull. This was not one death. Not an accident. This was repeated conflict. Ambush after ambush, strike after strike. The Ice Age was ending. Resources were shrinking. Families fought over water, land, and food. And in that struggle, they turned sharpened stone against one another. Jebel Sahaba is the world's first known war cemetery, proof that organized violence began long before kingdoms or empires. Here, on the banks of the Nile, humanity's oldest wounds tell us something haunting: war is as old as we are. But this was only the beginning. Because thousands of years later, beside a lagoon in Kenya, archaeologists found another massacre, this time of women, children, and even the unborn. The sun hangs low over a lagoon in what is now Kenya. 10,000 years ago, its shallow waters glistened with fish, its shores scattered with reeds, its air alive with the hum of insects. Here, a small band of hunter-gatherers lived, fished, and drank. They did not know cities. They did not know kings. They knew only the rhythm of survival. But on this shore, survival was cut short. Archaeologists uncovered 27 human remains at Nataruk, sprawled where they fell, preserved in hardened mud. Their bones record one of the most chilling scenes in prehistory. A man lies face down, his skull shattered by a crushing blow. Beside him, an obsidian blade still rests in his ribs. Another skeleton shows wrists bound, a prisoner, executed and discarded. The most haunting of all, a woman in her 20s, 6 months pregnant. An obsidian shard is lodged in her abdomen. The unborn child, preserved within her, is silent testimony that even the innocent were not spared. The scene is massacre. Women and children cut down alongside men. No burial. No ritual. No dignity in death. Just bodies left in the shallows, where the mud swallowed them and kept their secrets for 10 millennia. This was not a clash of warriors on even ground. This was extermination. Bound victims, crushed skulls, embedded arrowheads. The evidence tells us this was deliberate, organized, merciless. Why? The answer lies in the land itself. The Ice Age was over, but the world was unstable. Climate swung between wet and dry, famine and abundance. A lagoon rich in fish was worth more than gold. To one band, the people at Nataruk were neighbors. To another, they were obstacles. And obstacles, in this world, were eliminated. Archaeologist Marta Mirazan-Lar, who studied these remains, called it what it was. Proof that organized killing was already part of the human story. Not ritual, not accident, but war. A war that targeted not only fighters, but families. Look closer, and the horror sharpens. One child's tiny bones show fractures to the skull. Another lies close to a mother, both fell together. A man, struck from behind, crumpled face down with no chance to defend himself. Each skeleton is a frozen moment. Each wound, a sentence in the story of humanity's oldest violence. Nataruk shatters the illusion that prehistoric life was peaceful. It shows us that the will to dominate, to erase, to destroy the other, existed long before villages, before agriculture, before written history. The bodies left in this mud whisper the same message as those at Jebel Sahaba, only louder, only crueler. War has no innocence. War has no mercy. But this story does not end in Africa. Thousands of years later, in a cave in Europe, another massacre was uncovered. Dozens of skulls, severed from their bodies, arranged with care in pits of red ochre. Not just killing, but ritual. Not just violence, but ceremony. Deep in the forests of southern Germany lies a cave called Offnet. To step inside is to step into silence. The air is cool, the floor damp with centuries of stillness. Today it seems empty, but 6,000 years ago, this cave was a vault of horror. Archaeologists digging here uncovered not skeletons stretched in repose, but skulls, severed heads, buried in 2 shallow pits. 38 in total. Their bodies were gone. Their faces, gone. What remained was the part of them that had been most violently taken. The arrangement was not random. The skulls were carefully placed, nested together, their foreheads dusted with red ochre. Children, women, men, stacked in what looked like deliberate order. Not scattered, not carelessly discarded. This was not chaos. This was ritual. But the ritual began with slaughter. Each skull bore wounds. Fractures from blunt weapons, edges split by stone axes, faces crushed by heavy blows. These were not deaths by disease or accident. These were executions. Many victims were women and children, their skulls smashed and taken. Whoever killed them carried their heads away, brought them to this cave, and buried them like trophies. The ochre tells its own story. It was not smeared casually. It was sprinkled with care, a gesture of ceremony. Red, the color of blood. Red, the color of earth. Perhaps, to those who performed it, this was an offering. A ritual of power, or appeasement, or domination. Perhaps it was meant to erase the dead from memory, or bind them into it forever. Imagine the moment. A small settlement attacked at dawn. The men cut down. The women struck down after them. Children silenced. The victors dragged the bodies aside, sever heads from necks, carry them through the forest to the cave. There, by flickering torchlight, they place the skulls into pits, scatter ochre like priests, and seal them under soil. Was this religion? Was this hatred? Or was this simply war, made into spectacle? No one can say for certain. But the bones leave no doubt, this was organized violence. It was massacre, ritualized into meaning. Ofnit Cave forces us to confront a darker truth. War was not only about survival. By 600 BCE, it had become symbolic. It had entered the realm of ritual and identity. Violence was no longer just about killing the enemy. It was about making a statement, to the living, to the spirits, to time itself. The skulls tell us something else. Of the 38, most were women and children. The targeting was deliberate. The attackers did not come for warriors. They came to erase a community by striking its future, its children, its mothers. Ofnit is not a battlefield. It is a massacre sanctified in ritual. It tells us that even in the deep past, people did not kill blindly. They killed with intent, with choreography, with belief. And if the cave at Ofnit shocks with its ritual, the next site chills with its brutality. For not long after, in a small village on the fertile soil of Neolithic Germany, archaeologists unearthed a pit filled with shattered families. No ceremony. No ritual. Just raw extermination. The first village massacre. The pit of Talheim. The year is roughly 5000 BCE. Europe is no longer a wilderness of scattered hunters. By now, the Neolithic Revolution has taken root. Small farming villages rise along river valleys, their people sowing wheat and barley, tending cattle, raising children. For the first time in history, humans are not only surviving from day to day, they are building permanent lives. But permanence creates something new. Land. Fields. Herds. Resources not easily abandoned. And with resources worth defending, comes war worth waging. On the edge of one such village, near the modern town of Talheim in southern Germany, archaeologists unearthed a shallow pit. Inside lay the remains of 34 people, men, women, and children, all killed violently and dumped together. This was no orderly graveyard. There was no care, no ritual, no attempt to honor the dead. Bodies were thrown in haphazardly, limbs tangled, skulls cracked. Whole families lay together in death, their story written in wounds. The weapons tell us how it happened. Most skulls bore the same kind of fracture, a sharp, crescent blow delivered by a stone adze. These were farming tools, heavy blades fixed to wooden handles, used for cutting trees, digging earth. But in Talheim, they became weapons of massacre. Again and again, the same curved fracture appears, a grim signature of death by farmer's tool turned to war axe. One man's skull was split clean through the crown. Another's face was crushed. A woman's head was shattered from behind, struck as she fled. Children's skulls bore the same marks as their parents, cut down without hesitation. What's striking is not only how they died, but who they were. The dead at Talheim were not strangers gathered in random chance. They were families. Mothers and fathers, children, infants. Archaeologists could trace kinship through their bones. They lived together. They died together. And their killers did not spare them. Why? The answer lies in what farming created. When hunter-gatherers clashed, the motive was often immediate: food, water, territory for a night's camp. But in the Neolithic, people invested years into the land. They cleared forests. They built homes. They tilled the soil. Their survival was tied to place. And when survival is rooted in place, violence becomes about ownership. The massacre at Talheim is thought to have been a raid between rival communities. One group attacked another. Not to steal, not to enslave, but to annihilate. By wiping out families, they erased rivals and claimed their land. It was the beginning of territorial war, written in bone. Look into the pit and you can see it. A mother, skull fractured, lies beside a child whose tiny cranium bears the same fatal mark. A father's ribs are shattered by blunt force, his jaw broken, his body pressed into the earth against strangers who shared his fate. There is no sign of resistance buried with them. No weapons, no shield, no chance to fight back. This was not a battle. It was slaughter. Swift, decisive, merciless. The pit at Talheim tells us something crucial about the history of violence. Farming did not tame humanity. It armed us with new reasons to kill. Fields and herds created wealth. Wealth created envy. Envy created war. This was not survival at the edge of famine, as at Jebel Sahaba. Not extermination of rivals at a lagoon, as at Nataruk. Not ritualized ceremony, as at Ofnit. This was calculated. Pragmatic. Territorial. The first massacre of a village. And Talheim was not alone. Across Neolithic Europe, the same story appears again and again. Villages fortified with ditches and palisades. Villages burned. Villages emptied, their people slain or scattered. Soon after Talheim, another site in Austria revealed the scale of what came next. A whole fortified settlement overrun. Hundreds dead. Bodies discarded in ditches. Not just a raid. Not just a pit. But the destruction of an entire community. The Neolithic world was no longer fragile bands scattered across rivers. By 5200 BCE, Europe had changed. Farming villages dotted the landscape, fields stretched across clearings, and walls, ditches, ramparts, wooden palisades, rose to defend what had been built. These were not temporary camps. They were settlements meant to last. But permanence makes targets. And at Schletz, a Sparn in Austria, permanence ended in fire and blood. Archaeologists uncovered a fortified village here, trenches carved deep, walls raised high. Yet when they entered the soil, they did not find thriving life. They found silence. Silence broken by bones. Hundreds of skeletons lay scattered in the ditches, not buried but discarded, abandoned to rot. The marks upon them told a single, devastating truth: this village was not just attacked. It was exterminated. Many bodies bore blunt force trauma, skulls shattered by clubs, ribs broken by heavy blows. Others were pierced by stone-tipped arrows, still lodged in bone. Some had both, a strike from afar, then the finishing touch of a weapon close at hand. But the most haunting detail is the posture of death. Dozens of skeletons were found face down, their arms twisted, their heads crushed from behind. They had been struck as they fled, cut down in retreat, executed in pursuit. Children's small bones lay among them, some with their skulls split, others tangled beneath the bodies of mothers who had died trying to shield them. There were no survivors buried elsewhere. No trace of those who escaped. The evidence suggests the attackers left nothing behind. The settlement was overrun, its people slaughtered, its walls torn down or burned. Then its dead were left unburied, denied ritual, denied dignity, denied even the silence of the earth. This was war as extermination. The fortified ditch, meant to keep enemies out, became a grave for the defenders. The walls, once symbols of safety, became cages. The very defenses built to secure survival instead trapped the people within, and when the attack came, the walls offered no escape. The motive? Territory. As farming expanded, competition intensified. Populations grew, and fertile land was finite. Each village marked a claim. Schletz was one such claim, and when rivals came, they came not to raid, but to erase. The violence here was systematic. Not a raid in the night. Not an accident of escalation. This was organized war. An assault planned, coordinated, and carried out until the village ceased to exist. The message left behind in the corpses is clear: this land is no longer yours. Your people are no longer a people. Your memory ends here. And it nearly did. For centuries, the village lay in ruin, its walls crumbled, its ditches filled with the bones of the slain. When archaeologists uncovered them, they found not only the scale of the massacre but its cold precision. At Jebel Sahaba, war was survival. At Nataruk, extermination of rivals. At Ofnit, ritual killing. At Talheim, the first massacre of families. At Schletz, a Sparn, war reached its next stage, total annihilation of a community. But even this was not the end. Because centuries later, far to the north, war would take yet another form. Not raids. Not massacres of villages. But armies. Warriors clashing in the thousands. Weapons of bronze ringing against shields. Horses trampling into rivers. A battlefield, wide and brutal, where war finally began to look like the wars we recognize today. The river runs slow and dark through the Tollense Valley in northern Germany. Today, It winds through quiet fields and meadows. But 3,000 years ago, this calm water carried the weight of Europe's first Great War. When archaeologists first sifted its banks, they uncovered bones, at first a handful, then dozens, then hundreds. Soon it became clear, this was no burial ground, no cemetery. This was a battlefield. The valley held the remains of thousands. Warriors, horses, weapons. Europe's earliest known clash of armies. The bodies spoke of chaos. Skulls pierced by bronze-tipped arrows. Forearms shattered as they blocked incoming blows. Jaws split by sword strikes. Ribs snapped by spears. Horses trampled into mud alongside their riders. All preserved in the river's silt, frozen in their last desperate struggle. It was not a raid. Not an ambush. This was war on a scale never before seen in prehistoric Europe. Thousands of fighters, armed with bronze swords, spears, shields, bows. Many bore the marks of armor or foreign craftsmanship, suggesting alliances between distant groups. Others carried supplies, food, tools, even wagon parts, proof that this was not a skirmish, but a campaign. Imagine the scene. The river at their back, warriors face one another in ranks. The clash is deafening, bronze striking bronze, war cries tearing the air, arrows hissing like swarms of hornets. Spears drive into shields, splintering wood. Men wrestle in the mud, knives flashing, throats cut. Horses scream as they fall, their weight crushing those beneath. The Tollense battlefield stretches for kilometers, a river valley turned into a killing ground. Archaeologists estimate 4,000 warriors fought here, an enormous number for its time, equal to entire populations of villages. The death toll is staggering. Hundreds died on the spot. Many more were carried off by the river, their bones scattered downstream. And these were not untrained peasants. The injuries show skill in combat. Precise arrow shots to vital organs. Sword cuts delivered with practiced force. The dead were warriors, professional or semi-professional fighters, drilled, prepared, organized. This was not desperation. It was strategy. The discovery shocked historians. For years, many believed Bronze Age Europe was a world of small tribes and isolated skirmishes, not capable of large-scale battles. But Tollense proved otherwise. It revealed alliances, logistics, the movement of troops, the coordination of supply lines. In short, it revealed organized war centuries earlier than anyone expected. Look closer at the bones, and you see the story of individuals caught in the tide. One man, barely 20, struck down by both arrow and sword, pierced from a distance, finished at close range. Another, his skull caved in, his wrist splintered where he tried to parry a blade. A horse skeleton lies twisted, its rider beside it, both crushed in the final collapse. These were not nameless shadows. They were sons, fathers, brothers. They carried into battle not only weapons, but the weight of their families, their communities, their world. But on this riverbank, none of that mattered. The clash was too large, too brutal. When it ended, the survivors stripped the field, looted what they could, and left the dead behind. Thousands of corpses rotted in the valley, washing into the river, their remains sinking into silt. For 3 millennia, they lay silent. Until spades and brushes uncovered them again. Until their story emerged from the mud. the Tollense Valley marks a turning point. Here, violence had become something new. No longer survival raids. No longer village massacres. No longer ritual killings. This was war, armies meeting armies, with tactics, alliances, and carnage on a massive scale. The first true battlefield of Europe. It is a reminder that by the Bronze Age, humanity had learned not only how to kill, but how to organize killing into something larger, something systemic. War was no longer the shadow of survival. It was a choice, a tool, a weapon in itself. The river flows quietly now, hiding its past. But beneath its banks lie the bones of 4,000 warriors, whispering the same truth that Jebel Sahaba, Nataruk, Talheim, and Schletz had already spoken. War is not an invention of civilization. It is its companion. It is as old as we are. But even here, in Tollense, the story is not over. Because after the Bronze Age came iron. After warriors came armies. After valleys of death came empires built on conquest. The first wars of humanity were only the beginning. War did not begin with kings. It did not begin with bronze swords, or iron shields, or banners raised high above armies. It began here, in the silence of the Nile, in the mud of a Kenyan lagoon, in the red ochre of a German cave, in the pits of shattered villages, in the ditches of fallen fortresses, and finally, in the valley where thousands clashed until the river itself ran with blood. These places tell us something that words alone cannot. That violence is not an invention of civilization. It is not a tool we forged late in history. It is as old as scarcity. As old as fear. As old as humanity itself. The evidence is written in bone. Arrowheads lodged in spines at Jebel Sahaba. The bound hands of women at Nataruk. The severed skulls arranged with ochre in Ofnit cave. The families broken together in Talheim. The bodies left to rot in the ditches of Schletz, Asparn. And the 4,000 warriors who fell in the Tollense Valley, swallowed by the river. Each site whispers the same story. We have always fought. We have always killed. We have always made war. But to see only blood is to miss the deeper truth. For war was never separate from survival. It was born from the same hand that built shelters, that sowed seed, that held children. Violence was not our only inheritance, but it was one thread in the weave. These graves show not only our cruelty, but our capacity to endure it. Families buried their dead and lived on. Children survived raids and grew to raise new generations. Communities rebuilt after massacre. And in that endurance, war shaped who we became, not by choice, but by necessity. It shaped how we organized, how we defended, how we imagined ourselves against the other. It shaped borders before borders existed. It shaped identity before nations had names. And when the Bronze Age dawned, it shaped something else, scale. War was no longer ambush or raid. It became armies, alliances, campaigns. From the mud of Tollense, we see the shadow of what would come: Egypt, Babylon, Rome. Kings carving empire with sword and spear. Cities consumed by fire. Continents carved with blood. The truth is harsh, but undeniable. War is not an aberration in our history. It is the rhythm beneath it. And yet, there is something haunting in these earliest wars. They remind us that for all our monuments and empires, the essence of war never changed. A stone adze swung in Talheim leaves the same story as an artillery shell in the modern age. A flint arrow in Jebel Sahaba carries the same silence as a bullet lodged in bone today. The weapons change. The wounds remain the same. If there is hope, it lies in recognition. In understanding that violence is not destiny, but inheritance. That what we inherit, we can confront. That the same species who learn to kill also learn to build, to heal, to remember. The graves do not tell us to surrender to war. They tell us to acknowledge it. To see it clearly, not as myth, not as legend, but as evidence. And to remember that the cost of forgetting is always the same, another pit, another ditch, another valley of bones. This was the beginning of war. But it was not the end. If you think this was brutal, wait until you see what happened when men forged steel and built empires. The wars of prehistory were only the beginning. Subscribe now, because the next story will leave you speechless.